They dreamed of tomorrow, but tomorrow got here first. In the realm of science fiction, every frame is a wager on the unknown. Filmmakers gamble their visions against the ticking clock of technological progress, hoping their imagined futures will still feel bold by the time they reach the screen. But sometimes, the world moves faster than fiction. A film that once dared to look ahead suddenly looks embarrassingly behind. What happens when a sci-fi movie arrives late to its own future, when its central technology has already been outpaced, disproven, or simply rendered irrelevant by real-world breakthroughs? These aren't just artistic misfires, they're cinematic fossils, born outdated, mocked by the very reality they tried to transcend. Studios grow silent, marketing campaigns stall, audiences shrug or worse, laugh, and the film quietly vanishes into the cultural fog, too awkward to celebrate, too expensive to forget. This episode is a graveyard tour of those forgotten futures. 15 sci-fi films that were obsolete the moment they premiered. Some missed the mark by inches, others missed by light years. But each one serves as a tragic reminder. The future waits for no one, not even the people who try to invent it. Let's open the vault. 1. The Lawnmower Man, 1992. He entered the virtual world, but reality left him behind. Few films capture the sci-fi optimism and failure of early VR, like The Lawnmower Man. Originally a Stephen King short story, the film became an entirely different beast. A tale of a simple-minded gardener transformed into a godlike entity through experimental virtual reality training. At release, the film's computer-generated sequences were marketed as revolutionary. Audiences were promised a look into true cyberspace. What they got were jarring, pixelated animations, more reminiscent of educational CD-ROMs than alternate realities. The VR tech on display gloves, helmets, floating polygon worlds felt flashy in trailers, but painfully artificial in context. Worse, the science behind the transformation was never coherent, relying on metaphors rather than mechanisms. As real-world VR continued to evolve, eventually leading to Oculus, Vive, and seamless 3D rendering, The Lawnmower Man remained frozen in time. A film so determined to visualize the future that it became a monument to what the future quickly discarded. It wanted to expand minds. Instead, it became a cautionary tale of sci-fi outpaced by speed itself. 2. Circuitry Man, 1990. The future is toxic. But this movie's ideas were even more polluted. Set in a post-ecological collapse wasteland, Circuitry Man imagines a world where information is smuggled across state lines via human couriers with data ports in their heads. Sound familiar? It came 5 years before Johnny Mnemonic and still managed to look older. The film features low-lit sewers, plastic cables taped to skin, and a villain named Plughead who hacks people by jamming wires into their skulls. The tech aesthetic? Imagine Mad Max meets a Radio Shack clearance aisle. While it aimed for cyberpunk grit, it lacked both the budget and clarity to execute. In a time when real-world computing was sleekening, laptops were shrinking, GUIs were evolving, Circuitry Man clung to a vision of the future built entirely from exposed wiring and CRTs. It tried to be grunge futurism. Instead, it became a dead-end detour on the road to sci-fi relevance. 3. Evolver, 1995. He was built to play laser tag, then he started killing, but his tech was DOA. Evolver centers on a sentient, experimental gaming robot awarded to a teenager through a VR contest. The bot, initially programmed for laser tag, begins adapting its tactics, eventually escalating to real violence. The premise is classic mid-90 seconds paranoia, when games become too real. But the execution betrayed its ambition. Evolver itself looked like a recycled mall security unit, clunky, slow, and powered by visible pistons. Its AI operated through remote control logic and crude voice commands. By 1995, consumer robotics and game AI had already progressed past what the film considered futuristic, and while Evolver tried to explore themes of emergent behavior and unsupervised tech, it got buried under visuals that screamed early 90 seconds kid's toy. Its VR contest was based on pre-rendered graphics that paled in comparison to actual arcade games of the time. It wasn't scary, it wasn't believable, and worst of all, it was already behind. 4. Johnny Mnemonic, 1995. He carried 80 gigabytes in his brain. The world laughed and moved on. Based on a story by William Gibson, Johnny Mnemonic follows a data courier, Keanu Reeves, who physically carries sensitive information in a brain implant. In 1995, this was meant to be a radical look at information overload, corporate warfare, and the commodification of memory. But the film's biggest liability was timing. By its release, 80 gigabytes of data was already within reach for average users. The concept of carrying data in your head felt obsolete when USB sticks and hard drives were shrinking by the day. Visually, it relied on glitchy VR goggles, techno-tribal gangs, and data visualizations that resembled 3D mazes from outdated CD-ROM games. The future it predicted was cluttered, noisy, and slow. The irony? Johnny Mnemonic tried to visualize the weight of the digital world just as that world became lighter, faster, and more elegant. It wanted to be Neuromancer. It became a warning. Never bet on the future using last year's specs. 5. Fortress 1992. High-tech prison. Low-tech execution. Set in a dystopian future where families are restricted to one child, Fortress follows a couple imprisoned in a corporate-run underground facility after violating population laws. The prison is brutal, outfitted with intestinators that explode if inmates cross red lines, surveillance orbs, and biomonitors welded into flesh. On paper, the world building was sharp. In practice, it felt like budget cyberpunk, designed by people who hadn't seen how fast tech was moving. The prison's control room looked like an arcade, with blinking lights and comically large switches. The security systems, meant to feel invasive, looked like leftovers from a rejected RoboCop set. The dystopia was dark, but not ahead of its time. It was a collage of late, 80-second fears stretched into the wrong decade, and when real-world prisons began integrating biometric tracking and AI-enhanced surveillance, Fortress's fictional tech felt less like prophecy and more like retro fantasy. Its brutality survived, its relevance didn't. 6. The Net 1995. She discovered the dark side of the internet just as the internet left her behind. In The Net, Sandra Bullock plays a systems analyst whose identity is erased by a cyber conspiracy. It was one of the first major films to tackle themes of online anonymity, data manipulation, and digital surveillance. At the time, it felt like a warning, but by the time it reached audiences, it already felt like a lecture in last year's tech. The internet was evolving rapidly in 1995, and the net treated it like a mysterious underground society navigated through clunky GUIs, cryptic logins, and floppy disks. Hackers were shown tapping furiously on keyboards, while Java-based firewalls glowed red on oversized monitors. Its villains were shadowy corporations with vague control over online databases, but its portrayal of cyberspace looked less like a network and more like a high school computer lab with mood lighting. What was meant to be cutting-edge paranoia turned out to be visually primitive. And once real-life scandals like Yahoo breaches, the Patriot Act, and WikiLeaks emerged, the net felt almost quaint. The film's core fear that the web could erase you remained prescient. But its tools? Already forgotten. 7. Memoirs of an Invisible Man 1992. When invisibility becomes a joke, the tech isn't the only thing that disappears. This film starred Chevy Chase as a man rendered invisible after a lab accident involving a microwave tower and particle generators. What could have been a haunting story of isolation and perception instead leaned into tonal confusion. Was it a thriller, a comedy, a slow-motion tragedy? More importantly, the invisibility effects, once considered cutting-edge, were already being outdone by Terminator 2 a year earlier. The scenes relied heavily on green screen tricks, floating clothing, and glass footprints. It felt like a tech demo caught in a feature-length body. Audiences didn't buy it. Not the science, not the tone, and certainly not the execution. By 1992, invisibility wasn't shocking, it was expected to be seamless. Memoirs didn't vanish because of its story. It vanished because its imagination lagged behind its ambition. 8. Rollerball 1975. Remake in 2002. Violence sells, but only if it doesn't look like a glitchy broadcast from 1971. In a corporate-controlled dystopia, a brutal sport called rollerball is designed to suppress individuality through orchestrated violence. The original Rollerball, 1975, had grit, teeth, and social commentary. But the 2002 remake, intended to update that vision, made a catastrophic miscalculation. It leaned on cyber aesthetics that were already dying. The futuristic presentation was bogged down by green-tinted night vision, pixelated overlays, and music video editing techniques that screamed 1,999. Worse, the sport itself looked like a hyperactive version of arena wrestling, undermining the original's political weight. Technology had changed. Viewers had seen The Matrix. They'd seen Minority Report. Rollerball, 2002, looked like it was filmed in a warehouse, wired to a Windows 95 PC. It tried to reboot the future. Instead, it short-circuited its own relevance. 9. Runaway, 1984. They built robots to serve us. They forgot to update the future. Directed by Michael Crichton, Runaway unfolds in a near-future world where malfunctioning domestic robots pose deadly threats. Tom Selleck plays a cop specializing in neutralizing these rogue machines, facing off against Gene Simmons as a villain, armed with heat-seeking robot bullets and mechanical spiders. It sounds thrilling, but there's a problem. None of it felt futuristic, even in 1984. The film's robots looked like repurposed vacuum cleaners. Its advanced tracking devices resembled remotes with blinking lights. The tech was all boxy plastic and beeping panels, already outdated by the time it hit theaters. What truly doomed Runaway was its proximity to The Terminator, released that same year. Cameron's vision of AI was lean, brutal, and terrifying. Crichton's was clunky, slow, and strangely quaint. Audiences didn't need speculation about near-future robotics. They were already watching machines that could hunt you down through time. Runaway tried to warn us about automation, but in a year when the future suddenly had muscle and menace, its threats felt like toys left on the floor. 10. Colossus. The Forbin Project, 1970. It warned us about AI, but the world wasn't listening yet. In Colossus, the US government creates a massive supercomputer to manage its nuclear arsenal. It quickly gains sentience, links up with its Soviet counterpart, and demands total control over humanity. The plot is chilling, the pacing is clinical, and the AI's logic is terrifying in its coldness. But even in 1970, the film's technology felt like yesterday's newspaper. The supercomputer is a wall of blinking lights, magnetic tapes, and mechanical clatter. Communication with Colossus occurs through typewritten slips of paper. It's a dystopia bound by punch cards and cables. Ironically, the film's predictions about AI overlords have aged chillingly well, but its presentation hasn't. As personal computing took off in the following decade, Colossus looked less like a visionary menace and more like a mainframe stuck in bureaucratic hell. It guessed right, but it showed it wrong, and that visual disconnect ensured its warnings were ignored. 11. Looker, 1981. The future of advertising was here, just not the kind anyone believed in. Written and directed by Michael Crichton, Looker envisioned a media future where advertisers use lasers and computers to manipulate human perception, literally removing flaws from models, digitizing them, and deploying hypnotic light patterns to force consumer compliance. It sounds like prophetic sci-fi, and thematically, it was. But visually and technically, the film was undone by its execution. The digital scans involved spinning models on rotating platforms, while banks of flashing lights clicked rhythmically like a dentist's lamp. The computer graphics, barely above vector outlines. The tech lacked the sophistication that Tron would deliver just a year later. Even the hypnotic Looker gun, a weapon that freezes people with strobe flashes, felt cartoonish when compared to emerging research in behavioral psychology and subliminal messaging. Crichton may have been ahead of his time in concept, but the tools at his disposal lagged behind. The result? A film that foresaw digital manipulation, but couldn't convincingly portray it. Looker became a ghost of what it might have been, its ideas borrowed by sharper films, its body left behind. 12. Millennium 1989. They traveled through time to save humanity. But time didn't return the favor. Millennium follows time travelers from a polluted, post-apocalyptic Earth who abduct passengers from doomed flights moments before crashes, replacing them with identical corpses. Their mission? Preserve untainted human DNA for future survival. It's a grimly noble idea, one that hinges on elaborate analog tech, vapor trails, and handheld scanners blinking with red LEDs. But by 1989, the Cold War was ending, and environmental fears had shifted. More critically, the film's technology looked ancient even then. The time portals resembled glowing microwave doors. The control rooms were cluttered with knobs, CRT monitors, and tape spools devices already vanishing from modern labs. Worse, its time travel logic leaned on plastic time, a concept explained through a chalkboard and string, viewers weren't just unconvinced, they were bored. Back to the Future had made temporal paradox thrilling. Millennium made it feel like a VHS training video. When the future looks older than the present, no amount of narrative ambition can save you. 13. The Terminal Man, 1974. He was meant to be the first of a new breed. Instead, he became a relic before he arrived. Based on a novel by Michael Crichton, The Terminal Man told the story of a man implanted with a neural pacemaker designed to control violent seizures. When the system begins stimulating his brain beyond its limits, he spirals into a terrifying descent. The film leaned heavily on medical realism and mid-70 seconds computer theory, treating the brain like a programmable machine. But by the time the movie reached theaters, neuroscience had already moved beyond its reductionist view of consciousness. The idea that human behavior could be cleanly fixed through circuit logic was already under fire, and the film's portrayal of brain-computer interfacing via wall-sized processors and reel-to-reel data systems felt frozen in amber. Stylistically, the film was sterile, cold, almost clinical. That might have worked in its favor if its science hadn't already aged so poorly. Instead, it became a time capsule of early fears about cyborg identity, presented through hardware already being replaced in university labs. It tried to look forward. It ended up stuck in the past. 14 Freejack, 1992. In the future, the rich will steal your body. Too bad that future already looked old. Freejack envisioned the year 2009 as a dystopia where dying billionaires send mercenaries back in time to snatch healthy bodies. Mick Jagger. Yes, that Mick Jagger plays a bounty hunter chasing Emilio Estevez through a bleak urban hellscape filled with data jacks, blocky VR helmets, and floppy disk-styled hacking tools. Unfortunately for Freejack, 1992 was already flirting with the internet age. And by the real 2009, its tech assumptions looked laughable. The film's advanced visuals relied on CRT monitors, clunky interfaces, and car chases through decaying factories that looked more like 1980 than the future. Worse, its central premise that identity theft would be physical, not digital, missed the mark. The film's fear of corporate overreach might have been timely, but its tools of prediction were all wrong. What should have been thrilling sci-fi became accidental parody. Audiences passed, critics panned, and Freejack was left behind both narratively and technologically. 15. Saturn III 1980. It promised the future. It delivered a malfunctioning pile of wires. Set on a remote research outpost orbiting Saturn, Saturn III imagined a world where human labor would be replaced by towering, humanoid robots programmed via direct brain interface. The result? Hector, a clunky, headless metal beast powered by the unstable mind of a jealous technician. The film's central horror lay in its vision of artificial intelligence gone mad through emotional corruption. But by 1980, audiences had already met HAL 9000 Inches, 2001, A Space Odyssey. They'd seen Alien's sleek terror and Star Wars droids that felt more human than humans. Hector, in contrast, lumbered across the screen like an animatronic leftover from a scrapyard. And the film's attempt to dramatize brain-to-robot neural linking felt embarrassingly crude in a world where personal computers were already becoming household items. Critics ridiculed its outdated effects and stiff pacing. Viewers never came. What could have been a chilling meditation on synthetic emotion became a time capsule of tech anxiety, rendered obsolete by better, sharper nightmares that came before. Bonus fact: Slipstream, 1989. Before it could fly, the wind changed. In Slipstream, the world has been reshaped by a mysterious atmospheric disaster that wiped out most of civilization. What's left is a narrow, high-altitude air current, the slipstream, where survivors navigate the skies in gliders and prop planes, avoiding the wastelands below. The cast? Mark Hamill as a bounty hunter, Bill Paxton as a drifter, and even a young Ben Kingsley. On paper, it had potential, but the film's imagined future was already in the rearview mirror. The tech leather-bound dashboards, propeller engines, handheld radios felt closer to the Rocketeer than science fiction. Its environmental message was ahead of its time, but its visuals dragged it down. The aircraft looked cobbled from junkyards, the cities were bare scaffolding, and the story unfolded like a western in disguise, complete with dust, minimal electricity, and a vague sense of mysticism. Audiences in 1989 had seen Blade Runner, Aliens, The Abyss. They were watching digital worlds take shape, not faded wind tunnels. Slipstream wanted to soar, but it brought paper wings to a jet age. Its box office crash was inevitable. Even Mark Hamill's presence couldn't save it. Time had already passed it by, and the slipstream carried it out of memory. Futures fade. But what about the ones that never arrive? These films remind us that vision without timing is a gamble few can afford. But which of these cinematic relics still deserve another look? Which one failed because of the world and not the work? Tell us. Which obsolete sci-fi film do you think was simply too early for its time?